There is a secret so close to us that it becomes cruelly obvious, a power so intense that it was demonized, hidden, and distorted over the centuries, not because it was dangerous in itself, but because it brought human beings face to face with their own divinity. This power has many names: Kundalini, the serpent fire, the vital energy. But there is a specific path, walked by few and concealed in the darkest corridors of spiritual traditions: sexual alchemy. From the pyramids of Egypt to Tibetan monasteries, from Hermetic writings to tantric treatises, an invisible thread connects masters and disciples in an ancient art, the art of transmuting raw desire into conscious creative force, capable of attracting, manifesting, and transforming reality itself. But why, then, has sexuality been surrounded by so much fear? Why were the temples of the body turned into territories of shame? What happens when that energy, instead of being dissipated, is channeled, elevated, and directed toward a higher purpose? Perhaps the answer to what you most desire, whether love, prosperity, fulfillment, or spiritual expansion, is not outside, but in how you deal with your own inner fire. Today, we will explore a forbidden territory, not because it is dangerous, but because it is liberating. Are you ready? Since the dawn of humanity, sexuality has been seen as both a divine and dangerous force. It's no coincidence that nearly every mythology includes stories where fire, a symbol of vital energy, desire, creation, is stolen or challenged by mortals. Prometheus, in Greek mythology, dares to steal fire from the gods and give it to humanity. This fire was not just literal fire, but the capacity to create, to master, to transform reality. And the price: eternal punishment. Chained to a rock, having his liver devoured daily by an eagle. But the myth goes beyond punishment. It speaks of a boundary imposed by the gods upon humans, the limit of accessing and manipulating their own creative energy. The ancients knew sexual energy is the inner fire, not just the reproductive drive, but the spark of life itself. That's why the temples of Isis in Egypt, the tantric practices of India, and the Dionysian rituals of Greece never separated the erotic from the spiritual. The body was a living temple. The union of opposites in the sexual act mirrored the cosmic union. This dual nature of sexual energy was always understood by the masters. It is the energy that can enslave or liberate, that can bind to fleeting pleasure or open portals to divine ecstasy. In Hermeticism, this energy is symbolized in the caduceus of Hermes, two serpents entwined around a central staff. That central staff represents the spinal column itself, the axis where the serpent fire sleeps, waiting to be awakened. But how was this energy veiled over history? Why did sexuality, once sacred, become taboo, sin, shame? The answer lies in the implicit power this energy carries. Ancient civilizations understood that those who master their creative energy master their reality. A person who governs their own fire needs no intermediaries, no external authorities to access the divine. They themselves become temple, priest, and god. Religious, political, and social institutions realized that to maintain control over the masses, it was necessary to disconnect human beings from their own source of power. They turned pleasure into guilt, desire into sin, the body into an enemy, and the fire, which should ascend the spine as light, began to descend and dissipate like smoke. In Egypt, the practice of anastasis, or resurrection of the vital energy, was taught in the temples of Isis and Osiris. It wasn't about the literal resurrection of dead bodies, but the awakening of dormant energy within the living body. Initiates learned to channel sexual energy to nourish the higher centers of consciousness, rising from the base of the spine to the crown of the head, transforming desire into vision, instinct into intuition, pleasure into power. Creative energy is ambivalent. It can nourish or destroy. It is eros and thanatos, life and death. That's why ancient cultures surrounded sexuality with symbols, rituals, and myths. Not to repress it, but to protect it. They knew that without awareness, fire becomes wildfire. But with awareness, fire becomes light. Today, in modern society, we live a deep paradox. We are sexually stimulated at every corner, yet energetically exhausted. We lost the thread that once connected desire to the sacred. We turned fire into spectacle, into product, into addiction. But the spark is still there, dormant, waiting to be awakened not through external acts, but in the inner silence of one who dares to look within. And perhaps that was the greatest theft of all, not the fire of the gods given to man, but man being stolen from his own connection with the fire. Sexual alchemy, then, is the recovery of that lost fire. It is the return to the inner garden, where the masculine and feminine, the sun and moon, heaven and earth meet, not outside, but within each of us. And in that meeting, there is no more separation. Desire is no longer the enemy. The body is no longer a prison. The fire is no longer sin. The fire, finally, is liberation. If in the first chapter we saw that sexual energy is the fire stolen from the gods, here we enter the heart of the great work, the act of transforming that raw fire into a conscious creative force. Because it's not enough to possess the fire. One must know what to do with it. The alchemists called this transmutation, a powerful word, but often misunderstood. Many think that to transmute is to suppress, control, or repress. But no. To transmute is to take something in its densest form and elevate it to a more subtle vibration, without destroying its essence. It is turning lead into gold, without denying the lead. In the context of sexual energy, this means not wasting it, not dissolving it, not losing it in unconscious orgasm, but channeling it, accumulating it, redirecting it toward higher purposes. Taoist master Mantak Chia teaches in his writings on cultivating sexual energy that the human body contains a celestial microcosm, where energy meridians follow specific pathways, connecting the organs to the vital centers. Sexual energy, he explains, can be moved from the genitals to the brain, from instinct to intuition, from desire to insight. This is not a vague spiritual metaphor. It's a concrete practice involving breath, visualization, and contraction of specific muscles. Tantric tradition calls this sublimation, guiding the energy up through the subtle channels of the spine, from the base, Muladhara, to the crown, Sahasrara, awakening Kundalini, the sleeping serpent. But the goal is not merely to retain sexual energy. The goal is to transform its quality. Wilhelm Reich, the psychoanalyst who dared to confront the taboo of sexual energy in the West, said that repressed or ungoverned orgasm was the root of modern neuroses. But he also pointed to a third way, the conscious integration of sexual energy. For Reich, the orgone, this cosmic vital energy, could be stored in the human body and used as creative force, not merely sexual. Here lies the key to transmutation. Desire doesn't need to be eliminated. It needs to be purified. The sexual alchemist does not flee from desire, does not deny it, does not demonize it. He faces it directly, without being consumed by it. It's like harnessing the power of a dam. If you just open the floodgates, the water destroys. But if you channel it through turbines, it generates electricity. Desire is the water. Consciousness is the turbine. Hermetic traditions have long spoken of the importance of alchemical chastity. But this is not about literal abstinence. It is about not unconsciously wasting the creative force. Yes, it is absolutely possible to live an active sexual life and still transmute energy, so long as the act is not merely physical, but conscious, ritualized, intentional. Sexual alchemy is an inner symphony, where physical pleasure and spiritual elevation dance together. In Kundalini awakening, each chakra it passes through represents an integrated level of consciousness, a purification of energy from its densest aspects until it becomes pure light at the crown. But this process requires discipline, patience, repetition. This is not a one-night practice. It is a path which, as Paracelsus said, is not for the cowardly nor the impatient. That is why the alchemists always spoke of the secret fire, the fire that burns without consuming, the fire that warms without destroying. This fire is the mastered, purified, transmuted sexual energy. When the alchemist manages to keep it burning without consuming his own temple, he becomes an internal source of inexhaustible power. The practical consequence: this fire turns into personal magnetism, unexplainable charisma, a force of attraction that borders on the supernatural. The transmuted alchemist does not need to beg, to chase, to demand. He attracts, not because he manipulates others, but because he has transformed himself. The desire that once reached outward now radiates from within, and the world, like an obedient mirror, reflects what is vibrating at his core. This is true transmutation. Desire does not die. It is reborn as creative power. But as the ancient masters warned, power without purity of intention is dangerous. That is why the heart must be purified before the fire is intensified. Because the greater the fire, the more it illuminates, or the more it burns. The art of transmutation, then, is not a magical trick to manipulate external reality, but the oldest and most powerful magic of all, the power to transform oneself. When sexual energy is transmuted, it doesn't disappear. It transforms into an invisible force that begins to radiate from within the human being, like a magnetic field that affects everything around it. The human body then becomes a living magnet. And this magnetization is not merely symbolic. It is bioenergetic, psychological, spiritual. Manly P. Hall wrote that the aura of an initiate becomes luminous and vibrant, radiating an influence that magnetizes everything around, even without words. This magnetism is felt. It cannot be seen with the naked eye, but it acts like personal gravity, a force of attraction that transcends appearance, speech, or status. Modern science is just beginning to scratch the surface of this phenomenon. Studies in bioelectromagnetism have already shown that the human heart generates an electromagnetic field thousands of times more powerful than that of the brain. Research by the HeartMath Institute, especially the study titled "The Electricity of Touch, Detection and Measurement of Cardiac Energy Exchange Between People," suggests that this field not only influences one's own body, but also interacts with the electromagnetic fields of those nearby, indicating a subtle energetic communication between individuals. But mystics go further. They affirm that sexual energy, when sublimated and elevated, amplifies this aura, this field, this invisible magnetism. It's as if the body becomes an inner sun, radiating frequencies capable of attracting situations aligned with that vibration. Taoism calls this Ti, the magnetic virtue, the natural power of attraction that arises in one who is aligned with the Tao. In Hermeticism, it is the manifestation of the astral light, the ethereal field where all thoughts, emotions, and intentions are recorded and circulate. When transmuted, sexual energy is deposited into this astral light. It begins to shape probabilities, bending the paths of reality in the direction of conscious intention. Carl Jung, in his reflections on the collective unconscious, said that eros is not just the sexual instinct, but the psychic force that connects and unites all things. This force operates silently, weaving invisible threads between people, events, and opportunities. Here lies a deep paradox. The more someone seeks externally, the more reality retreats. The more someone overflows from within, the more reality draws near. True magnetism is not an effort to attract. It is a state of being. That is why the great masters of sexual alchemy were often described as fascinating, irresistible, radiant. Not because of their appearance, but because they carried a dense, vibrant, luminous energy field. This magnetism was also known as personal power. But not in the modern sense of manipulating or controlling others. It was the power of being so full, so whole, so complete within oneself, that the universe began to reorganize itself around that center. Sexual alchemy, then, doesn't just attract people sexually. It attracts opportunities, synchronicities, abundance, insights. Because creative energy, when not leaked, seeks other ways to express itself. If it's not exhausted in physical pleasure, it turns into creativity, courage, vision. Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest minds in history, attributed his creative capacity to the sublimation of sexual energy. There are accounts that Tesla avoided physical relationships not out of moralism, but because he understood that this energy was his creative fuel. He transformed it into focus, invention, and connection with the field of ideas. The modern sexual alchemist may or may not choose celibacy. It is not literal abstinence that generates magnetism, but consciousness. It is the deliberate use of energy. It is the act of maintaining elevated intention and awakened presence, even amid physical pleasure. To not lose the center means not to be completely overtaken by the automatism of pleasure, as one who acts on impulse without direction. It means being fully present, with body and soul in the same place. The forgetting of self occurs when desire takes the reins and awareness fades, when pleasure becomes an escape instead of a portal. It is when the human being is reduced to a reactive mechanism and loses the thread of presence. That is the real waste, not the energy itself, but the fact that it escapes without intention, without purpose, without consciousness. Unconscious orgasm drains because it disperses vital force with no return. Conscious orgasm nourishes because it elevates that same force and reintegrates it into the being. When energy is transmuted, it begins to vibrate at more subtle frequencies. It's like throwing a stone into a lake. The ripples expand, touch the shores, and return to the center. Everything you send out comes back. But in sexual alchemy, what you send is not just mental intention. It is intention charged with vital energy, and that gives weight, force, and magnetism to desire. That's why in tantric and hermetic traditions, a warning is often given. To transmute without purifying the heart is to create a powerful magnet without direction, because sexual energy amplifies everything. If there is shadow, it amplifies the shadow. If there is light, it amplifies the light. Invisible magnetism, then, is not a technique to get what you want, but a path to become what you desire. And by becoming, the universe responds. The external world is merely a mirror of inner vibration, and transmuted sexual energy is the polishing of that mirror, the brilliance that begins to reflect more clearly what truly resides at the center of your being. In the end, we don't attract what we ask for. We attract what we are. And sexual alchemy is the process of raising that self to its highest vibration, so that everything around comes into resonance with it. This magnetism cannot be taught in books. It cannot be faked. It cannot be bought. It emanates. And wherever it reaches, the world responds. Because at its core, the entire universe dances around the one who has become a sun. Thank you for watching.